So welcome back, everybody, and thanks for joining us for another webinar organized by Princeton for everyone worldwide. We're very happy to have Justin Wolfers with us from University of Michigan. Hi, Justin.
Hi, hi.
Justin will talk about an Econ Educator's Guide to Our AI-Powered Future. The emphasis, I guess, is on AI and how the world will look like in a few years, and how can we use generative AI like ChatGPT and other tools like Gemini and so forth to change our teaching, and will it fundamentally alter our teaching and assessment? So let me give you a few opening remarks. So some things which got me excited recently. One thing is this new notebook LM from Google, where you can actually throw in some documents. You can collect all the documents for a particular topic, what I did here on the topic on the resilient society. And then it gives you a study guide. You can press on study guide. You can create an artificial intelligence podcast where two people talk to each other about the book. And it's a really nice tool to play around with. It's also a nice tool for students to collect all the information for a particular class. And then they can ask and communicate back and forth, talking to essentially to the material of the class and ask constantly questions. Now, spinning this a little bit further, you might have a conversation with your favorite economist. Could be Hayek, could be Keynes, or any historical figure. You can also talk to philosophers from 2,000 years ago, but it will be difficult to have the original voice. But I guess for Hayek and Keynes, there will be, in the near future, be some voices there. You can talk to them directly and talk about economics. So all you have to do is to upload all the documents, videos, and audio files and start talking. And more generally, I think we probably will not read books anymore. We will talk to books. So that's essentially a different way of learning, talking to books and back and forth, or have a conversation with various books. That raises the question, is the written word still the way to store knowledge, or do we store knowledge in the future very differently? So we did for thousands of years, or a few thousand years, we stored knowledge, writing things down. We might do it differently. We might not read, but we will have more conversations with previous knowledge. And one example is essentially already you can have a conversation with Markus Aurelius, his meditations. You can actually have a conversation with him, the Roman emperor, philosopher, about his meditations. So there are a lot of exciting new things coming up, and that leads also to changes in economics and teaching of economics and doing research in economics. So you can have artificial intelligence tutors. And the question is, will this lead to more equal opportunity? Because everybody can have her or his private tutor, not only the wealthy. And this might actually lead to a reduction of inequality problems, hopefully. Or could it be it's like online learning? There was a huge hype on online learning. At the end of the day, it made a difference, but not as radically as people thought. And of course, there are also challenges in terms of grading. If everybody can just answer their artificial intelligence agent, and they might come up with answers. So perhaps we move back to only oral exams or other settings. We have to see about that. You can also, economic research will change. Probably the usefulness of research assistants will go down. So all the new developments of having a lot of pre-docs and all this might change, because it might be more efficient just to use your artificial intelligence unit. And we had earlier webinars by Sergio Correra and by Kevin Bryan on how to use artificial intelligence and generative AI for research. And also the way we will distribute knowledge will also change. Now, Justin asked a few poll questions, and I think he will throw more questions at you during the conversation, during his presentation. The first one was, will generative AI, is it a threat to existing approach of teaching and assessing things? And 19% thought that is a threat for them. But it's an opportunity of new methods of instruction. That's 86% thought. So most of the people thought is opportunity. And will it demand a wholesale restructuring of the teaching? That's 43%. That's a huge number. As I should say, all of these questions can answer more than, you don't have to pick one. You can pick also all three if you want to. But again, 19%, 86%, and 43%. With regard to assessment and grading, how will this change? It's not a threat to my approach, like your teaching approach, 30% thought. It's a substantial threat to integrity. That's what 47% thought. And given I have partially adjusted my class already, 45%. And there was also one person who said he has completely adjusted his class. Perhaps he can throw some questions in the Q&A and we can pick it up as we go through the presentation by Justin. And finally, about concerning teaching, is generative AI provides no obvious use in teaching? 9% thought, and 93% thought it provides new opportunities for teaching. So with this and expecting some exciting new insights, I'm giving the floor to Justin. And as always, I should say, if you're on YouTube, please look down at the comments. You can see a link to the executive summary of this presentation. So if you want to see everything quickly with timestamps and executive summaries, you will find them with the link down on YouTube. Justin, the floor is yours, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Marcus, and it's a great joy to be here. And I think those warm-up questions really give us a sense that we're all, as a community, still grappling with these issues. And so my role here is as a fellow economics educator. So we're not going to wear our research hats today. Instead, the goal is, let's talk about our shared experience as economics educators and the changes that AI is bringing, will bring, and how we're going to adjust. So, we as economists are pretty used to thinking about new technologies. We've seen them before, and we've studied them very closely, and I think we have a fairly standard way of thinking about it. Doesn't always work well with the broader public, but we tend to say that when a new technology comes along, how will life change? Well, our answer is it's going to be out with the old. Some types of work are going to disappear. Buggy driver, gone. And it'll be in with the new. There'll be new types of even more productive work that will arise. We'll have taxi drivers. We'll have mechanics. We will have people inventing self-driving cars. So that's our model for thinking about technological change. We think the Luddites were wrong, and this is the right approach. Well, we'd want to be consistent and apply the same thing to us in our own work with our own craft. When we're talking about a different technological change, of course, here being the rise of generative AI. So the same rules apply to a generative AI, which is out with the old. Some tasks are going to disappear. I'm going to make the case that high stakes at-home assessment is dead. You've done the last version of that you're ever going to do. AI-fueled plagiarism has killed it. And if you haven't already admitted defeat, I hope to bludgeon you into submission very shortly. But then there's in with the new. This is the idea that maybe with new tools we can do new things. We don't yet know what they are. I, like you, I'm an economics instructor trying to figure it all out. And I'm just reporting back what I've learned on my journeys. So let's start with out with the old. And I want to be relatively brief here. But I want to make 3 points about the challenge that's posed by generative AI or ChatGPT. The first is your students are already using it, whether you want to admit it or not. It's hard to find precise data on your students, but here I have the number of times that people are using generative AI, and I've broken it out by age because there's a very sharp age gradient. So I draw your attention to the 18 to 29-year-olds, of whom 14% use it several times a day, another 10% use it at least once a day. So 1 in 4 students is using it at least daily. And 1 in 2 students is using it at least several times a week. Sorry, I should say this is young people. Now, college students, I imagine, are much more engaged. So I don't have those numbers for you, just I didn't track down useful data on that. But I imagine what we learn from this is most of your students are using generative AI quite frequently. How are they using it? This here is a study that I'm not sure I believe. It's not the most well put together survey. It's done by that most reputable of all survey organizations, study.com. That was a joke. But this is the share of students who admitted to study.com that they're aware of ChatGPT, 90%. This, by the way, is way back in January 2023, which is a lifetime ago in generative AI land. 89% back 2 years ago had used ChatGPT to help with homework assignments. 53% had used it to help write an essay, and 48% had used it for an at-home test or quiz. And if you remember early 2023, almost no professors were saying you may use ChatGPT, in which case almost all of this is students admitting to using it where the instructor was probably unaware that they were using it. Second comment I want to make is that ChatGPT is better and better at economics than you might realize. The set of bars down at the bottom, we can give it sort of Econ 101. AP Micro and AP Macro are meant to be Econ 101. Whether they're quite at that level is arguable. But when you give ChatGPT 4 those tests, it scores at the 100th percentile, which is to say it beats every student who takes the AP. There's a fairly standardized test that is often given at the end of Economics 101 called the TUS. And ChatGPT 3.5 did the TUS, and it came at the 99th percentile of macro and the 91st percentile of micro. And I'm pretty confident that if you gave it ChatGPT 4 instead, it would be back at the 100th percentile of both. And then the sorts of tests you and I did to get into graduate school, things like the GRE, it's very good at, particularly on the verbal side. Not quite good enough at the GRE quant, say, to get into Princeton, but still pretty good. Although, again, that was ChatGPT 4. ChatGPT 4.0 for Omni is actually even better still, and I think would get a lot closer to the top. And of course, it beats 9 out of 10 students who take the bar exam, which is something I like to remind my lawyer friends of frequently. The point here is it's very, very good at any form of assessment. There was a student at Harvard who decided that what she'd do is have ChatGPT 4 write all of her assignments, or she would submit assignments to her professors and ask them to grade them. And ChatGPT 4, just by simply copy and pasting the essay prompt, she got an A- in microeconomics, where the professor, I think it was Leibson, described the essay as being impressive with attention to detail. GPT-4 got an A at Harvard in macroeconomics, an A in the American presidency, an A in conflict resolution, a mere B in intermediate Spanish, and so on. So wherever you teach, if it's getting A's at Harvard, it probably would get A's at your institution as well. Now, when I say ChatGPT is better than you think, I want to be very careful. I teach Economics 101, which is the most broadly taught class in economics. As a result, the quantity of training material is enormous. As a result, ChatGPT is, and I want to be quite precise here, nearly perfect at Economics 101. So I've made up a graph, and I want to tell you the data on this graph are literally made up. They're from my imagination. But I've imagined what I think the quantity of training material might look like, and the reason that it's nearly perfect at 101 is there's so much training material. For those of you who are teaching intermediate micro or macro, I think the problem is probably pretty close to being as great. There is so much material out there, it's close to perfect at that, and the same is probably also true for MBA and MPA courses. Once you start getting to topics courses or doctoral level economics, it falls off quite a bit. Now, one thing I want to warn people of, if you played around with ChatGPT 6 months ago, it probably was quite poor at your doctoral level courses. If you play around with it over the next 3 months, the new versions that are rolling out are capable of reasoning. And that reasoning looks a lot like the sort of work we teach our doctoral students. So I think it's actually going to get enormously better at doctoral level, answering the sorts of problems that you may ask your doctoral students. But for now, I think the real threat is for those of us teaching the large service classes. ChatGPT will not only pass your class, but enable a student in your class to get an A simply by using Control-C and Control-V. And then the third observation I want to make is, I don't know about you, but I do know that I sat at the University of Michigan hoping to get useful assistance and insight from our Center for Teaching and Learning. And I think the quality of advice I was given was terrible. And it was so bad that it radicalized me to start working on this. And that's why I'm here giving this seminar right now. Part of the problem is that our students are better at this than many of the faculty are. But if you feel calm because of the advice you've been given by your university, I want you to stop feeling calm. There's a lot more to learn. We had a session at the Ford School where a faculty member was given the job of going out and finding out what ChatGPT could and couldn't do, and then coming back and advising the rest of the faculty how we should change our teaching. That faculty member came back and said, well, the responses from ChatGPT, they're formulaic and boring and dry, and these essays, you can tell them from a mile away. It hallucinates facts and citations and makes errors. It makes math errors all the time. This, by the way, was back a year ago, so GPT 3.5. It's not up to date, so it can't tell you anything that's happened since the end of the training date. They told us it couldn't read graphs, which are important to economics. That computers can't reason. And of course, ChatGPT is terrible because it's trained on the canon of dead white men. So what happened, I think, was my colleague felt threatened by the new technology and went looking for shortcomings. Very natural human reaction, went looking for ways in which this technology was not as smart as they were. Now, that's a very natural reaction for those of us who have all of our human capital invested in the old way of doing things. But it's not how our students are looking at things. So where we've been looking for shortcomings, our students have been looking for solutions. So yes, it's true that the first draft from a ChatGPT essay will be formulaic, but if you simply follow up with a prompt, sharpen that essay, or write in the voice of Hemingway, or if you want to sound particularly learned, make this sound like Markus Academy, it will rewrite the essay in a way that doesn't look at all like the sort of boring prose you were reading a year ago. It is true that ChatGPT can hallucinate facts and citations. It's also true that deep under the hood, there's a single parameter called temperature. And that temperature parameter is basically how much you let the computer make stuff up. And if you set the temperature to 0 and give it enough training material, you can basically get the rate of hallucinations down to 0. And I'll try and show you an example of that later on. Third, it is true that ChatGPT makes math errors. My favorite example of this, you could ask ChatGPT, is 9.2 bigger or smaller than 9.11? Now, I think you know the answer. But ChatGPT was trained on text. And in text, section 9.11 comes after section 9.2. And so for a while there, ChatGPT thought 9.11 was larger than 9.2. That's because it's a text, it's a text-based robot. Now, it turns out you can simply say to ChatGPT, check in Python. And then it will literally call up Python and ask Python if 9.11 is bigger or smaller than 9.2. And Python doesn't make mistakes. And so the era of math errors is either behind us or soon will be. Certainly the era of arithmetic errors, you as a user can put them behind you. ChatGPT is not up to date. That's fine. Use Bing AI instead, which reads the web day by day, minute by minute. ChatGPT can't read economics graphs. Turns out they just released ChatGPT 4 Omni, which is multimodal, which means that it can take in photographs and read graphs. It can also take in speech. So that shortcoming is gone. Computers can't reason. If you're on the plan, the paid $20 a month plan, they've just released ChatGPT 4.01, which is a model that is much more expensive to run because it basically reasons. Now, I understand it doesn't reason, but it does an incredibly good imitation of human reasoning to the point that the sorts of errors you were seeing earlier are no longer popping up. And then there's the concern that ChatGPT is trained on the canon of dead white men. Absolutely it is. Guess what? So are our students. For better or worse, the history of economics, certainly the way we teach it currently in the United States, is predominantly the canon of dead white men. So this is a description of our field rather than a shortcoming of ChatGPT. And the point is, once you go from looking for the shortcomings to looking to solutions, you discover that all of the shortcomings have solutions. And our students are becoming very good prompt engineers. And if you can just engineer a little bit better than the middle-aged humanities scholar who put together this advice for me, then you will, as a student, do very well on all of your homework. In fact, you'll earn an A. So my meta theory of why you're getting bad advice, and again, I can't guarantee that's true at your university, but it was true at mine, is that we academics have had a tendency to go looking for what ChatGPT can't do. We want to find our place in the world and find why we're still important. And this, of course, yields confirmation bias. We look hard enough for ways in which it's ineffective, and then we declare victory. There's a role for me after all. Now, our students instead, they've been brought up in the age of growth mindsets. They're looking for what it can do. So they're problem solving. They're searching for ways in which ChatGPT can be effective. And if you take that approach, you'll discover that it can be effective in all sorts of domains, particularly in helping you on your coursework. So I don't want to spend a lot more time on describing the challenges posed by generative AI. And it's because I actually gave a whole online seminar about this a while ago. And so if you're interested, snap that QR code and go and have a look at it. But I simply want to, so, here's the ad. You've seen it. This now lets me change the subject. I want to change the subject a little bit to what we can do with this new tool rather than the ways in which it threatens the ways we used to do business. But this is just to say, I want to wrap up this point by saying, this is the point I suggested earlier. Given that ChatGPT is nearly perfect at the sorts of work that we assign to our students, and that our students know how to use it, we can no longer do high-stakes at-home assessment, because the possibility of plagiarism and plagiarists earning an A or better in our class is just too high. Too many of our students will be able to not only pass our classes, but earn A pluses by doing Control-C, Control-V. Our short-run solution to this has been to move towards in-class exams. I've been quite saddened by that, in that the one thing I learned to do during the pandemic was write at-home open book tests that didn't require all that infrastructure. But this new era has returned us to what some are calling the second era of the blue book. And so it would be good to be long blue books right now, because that's what a lot of people are using. So that's out with the old. What I want to do in the rest of the talk is instead talk about the opportunities. What is it we can now do with this new technology that we couldn't do in the past? So hopefully I've convinced you you're going to have to look closely at the way you've been doing assessment and bring yourself up to date. But now I want to push, what can we do that's fun and cool that we couldn't do before? So here's one way of framing the problem. If at-home high-stakes assessment is gone, how should we reinvent universities? And Adrian Wooldridge, who was the editor for many years of The Economist, now writes for Bloomberg, had a brilliant idea. He said, maybe Harvard needs to learn from Oxford and Cambridge. What does he mean by that? Well, Oxford and Cambridge have what they call the tutorial system. Once a week, if you're an undergraduate, you'll meet with your tutor, employed at one of the colleges, with sometimes one-on-one, sometimes two students and one tutor. You'll bring an essay with you, and you'll spend an hour with that tutor, and he or she will drill you on that essay. And you'll have to explain it, and you'll have to defend it, and you'll have to debate it. And it's absolutely clear that at the end of that hour, your tutor has a very strong sense of your understanding of the material. So even if ChatGPT wrote the essay, you have to be there and have to be able to defend it. So Adrian Wooldridge's big idea was that what we need to do is all be a whole lot more like Oxford. Look, here's the problem with that. I teach at a big state school. There are 500 students in my Economics 101 course. So what I would have to do is go to my dean and say, at the moment, one professor is teaching 101. All I need is another bit more headcount, just another 499, and then we'll move to the Oxford model. I think you can guess how that talk is going to go.
So Justin, can I ask you a question concerning, there's also this software which tries to identify whether something was written by ChatGPT, like this GPT-0. Will you touch on this? Or
I'm so glad. I forgot to raise that point, which is that software is broken and it doesn't work. Many of us thought there's companies like Turnitin who realized they could make a lot of money if they could just find which essays were written by the computer. And the early computer writing was so robotic and so terrible, it was easy to do. It's now impossible. It is actually possible for a big company to leave what they call watermarks in the data. Remember that what ChatGPT is basically autocomplete. And you could imagine, for instance, saying, so each time it gets to a new word, it flips a coin as to which word to use next. And you could imagine saying, hey, instead of flipping a coin, just put a thumb on the scale for words that have the letter Z. And then ChatGPT output would have too many words with the letter Z, and it would be easy to detect. Now, ChatGPT has chosen not to activate that, and it's fine that they haven't. They've not done it for competitive reasons. But it doesn't matter because we have open source LLMs. And so as long as there's someone who's willing to release an LLM that doesn't watermark, then students are going to be able to cheat. So the idea that the computer can save us from the computer was optimistic and wrong. And it looks like it can't.
What
so
about
the question,
the tutor, coming back to your tutor, that your dean will not be happy that you have to hire another hundreds of lecturers to do the tutoring. What about the AI can do the tutoring itself?
my man, you are one slide ahead of me.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I love it. So look, the idea that Wooldridge has is that personalization can help get us out of this trap. But what we need is personalization at scale. At Oxford, they have what my computer-generated background here shows, which is enough staff. There's one guy wearing a tie for each student there. What we need to do instead is still have personalization, but personalization now at scale. This, my dean is going to be a lot happier at, because the robots, in this case generative AI, are enormously cheaper. So this is, I've gotten this far. What is the new teaching opportunity offered by the present moment? It's personalization at scale. And then the rest of the talk and the rest of this broader project is, how do we operationalize that? What does that mean? What are some actual applications that give voice to your idea, Markus, of personalization at scale? That's what's new and possible. That's where the choice set just expanded. So let me tell you why scale matters here. And here I'm making up some numbers, but I just want to make the point. We know that college grads earn more than non-college grads, and there's a whole literature in labor economics proving it's causal. We think that the NPV of future earnings of a college grad turns out to be about $1 million higher than a non-college grad. So if that's over 4 years, that means you're adding about a student is adding about $250,000 of human capital per year. They're there for 2 semesters, so that's $1.25 per semester. They take 4 classes per semester. That means each class a student takes adds about $30,000 to their human capital. If you can find a way of making me just 5% more effective, then I will make that student $1,500 better off. And by the way, the early studies on industry applications of AI suggest that we can often make people 20 to 40% more productive. So this is a very low estimate. So I can make each student $1,500 better off if I can figure out how to use this technology. I also have 500 students, so that's $750,000 per class that I teach. And if I teach 2 classes a year, I can create an extra $1.5 million worth of value per year, just teaching 2 classes per year a little better. Or just think about this: if you were my department chair, if I come to you and ask you for some money, if I can find a way to save you 1 minute per student per week, and you have 500 students, and teaching assistants cost $60 an hour, and I teach, so that means I'm going to save $500 per week, right? $60 an hour, $1 per minute, 1 minute each. So over 16 weeks, I'm going to save the economics department $8,000 per class that I teach. And this might be that each student emails you less or something like that. So the point is, once you start to think about this, if we can do personalization at scale, the numbers are so big, we should be investing a lot of money in this. I'm going to show you a couple of my tools now. But before I get there, I think one of the most important things is to think about how we should assess these tools. So when we tell a student, when a student's thinking about buying a hamburger, we tell them, well, remember opportunity cost, and the opportunity cost of a hamburger is not a steak. It's a slice of pizza. And I want you to remember that, because when I'm going to show you some AI tools, you could react the way my colleague did and say, AI is not perfect. And I will respond, that's not relevant, because your next best alternative is not perfect either. So what I'm going to do throughout is I'm going to compare the AI's output, and I urge you to do the same, to the alternative that I have, which is using University of Michigan PhD students as my teaching assistants. They're pretty good. They're also not perfect. And I want to make the case to you, and the thing I want you to watch is, when you watch what generative AI can do, if implemented well, it can be as good as a doctoral student at a leading PhD granting institution. And of course, for many of us, we actually don't get enough teaching assistants. And so the next best alternative is nothing. And so the question is, are we helping the students at all relative to not offering them tools. Okay, so I've got this one big idea, and Markus stole it. It's personalization at scale. And what I want to do is show you 4 applications that I've come up with so far. I'll have to move quickly.
Just quick question by John Chambers asked a question. So this personalization, this tutor, this AI tutor might be useful for tutoring, but can't you also cheat with respect to just copy and paste to this AI tutor as well? He would like to know.
Let me show you. So we're thinking about that. So I'm going to show you 4 possible applications, right? Or however many we get to. Let me start with a Socratic tutor. You'll notice I use the word Socratic. Socratic's really important. Engage the student in a dialogue. Socrates never gave the student the answer. Socrates would simply respond with a better question. Okay? So making an online tutoring bot is absolutely easy. What you do is you simply go to chatgpt.com/GPTs, and it actually has a no-code solution where you can make a chatbot really easily. And while I'm speaking, in fact, I've sped up the video. In less than 2 minutes, I'm going to make you an online tutoring chatbot. So I just tell it that I'd like a chatbot tutor for economics courses. I explain that students will come for help on homework or to explain stuff they don't understand. And I wanted to include some conversation starters. And so I've typed all that in, and then it starts to ask me some parameters. It says things like, what should we call it? And so we're going to call it the Economics Tutor Pro. And now what it's going to do is it's going to generate a little icon, an image that represents my new chatbot. And we're done. We just implemented a new economics tutoring chatbot. Okay, and then it says, well, tell me more. So, well, I wanted to emphasize the truth and avoid misunderstandings. So now we have our new chatbot. Let's now try it out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, I'm going to try it out. I'm going to say, what is the natural rate? That's a student question might ask. And you'll notice the chatbot's immediately gone to the natural rate of unemployment. And it's telling me about frictional unemployment and structural unemployment. Here's the first indication of a problem. What if they were asking about the natural rate of interest? Or what if my definition of structural unemployment is not the one that they're giving here? Structural unemployment, it says, is skills mismatch. A lot of people use the term instead to mean when the real wage is above the equilibrium wage. And so because this is not trained on my course, it's actually quite unhelpful, right? It can mislead students in the same way Google does. So the question that's worth asking yourself at this point, any of us could create a chatbot tutor in 2 minutes, but what problem does it solve? Because if the question the student has is what is the natural rate of unemployment, we already know how to solve that. We use Google. So generative AI is not solving an important problem here. So here I'm just trying to give you some structure in how to think about the role that it can play in education. Chatbots have been, in fact, remarkably unsuccessful in the first few years of their existence. You might notice our world is not ruled by chatbots. We still have our jobs, despite the claims that they could do our jobs really well. And the problem is, you can call it the Dunning-Kruger effect. Dave's one of my colleagues here at Michigan, which is the problem is you don't know what you don't know. And so if you give a student an undirected chatbot that says, I know everything Markus Brunnermeier knows, ask him questions. What's the student going to do? The student actually thinks he understands economics pretty well. He doesn't have any questions. In fact, this has been a really, really important lesson in the folks who do chatbot development. Duolingo put millions into chatbot development, and they created the chatbot not unlike the one I just showed you, and then no one used it because no one knew what question to ask. And so there's a real problem with undirected chatbots, right? They're the solution to a problem that we haven't yet identified. An open-ended, undirected chatbot has exactly one ideal use case. Control-C, Control-V. Take the online test, the problem set, copy it, paste it, and get a nearly perfect answer, right? In fact, it's worse than that. The student can now pull out their phone. This is a little TikTok. take a photo of the screen, including the graph, and it will give them an answer straight away. So locking down the browser doesn't help, right? And so it's little wonder that most of the uses of chatbots so far have been cheating, because that's something they're best designed to do. In fact, so I think this is actually problematic at a deeper level. The optimal use of AI is you want to engage with it as a co-creator. In the language of economics, AI should be a complement to thinking. The actual use of undirected bots is we're using it as a substitute for thinking. We're doing Control-C, Control-V. And it's not just undergraduates. There was a wonderful study where they gave consultants at Boston Consulting Group access to ChatGPT and asked them a whole bunch of questions. And the right graph shows a histogram where the horizontal axis here shows you how similar the answers these BCG consultants gave was to the answer that ChatGPT gave. And it turns out even highly paid consultants do not engage with AI as a co-creator. They just do Control-C, Control-V. They cut thinking out of the loop. So this means not only are our students potentially not learning economics, they're also not learning appropriate use of AI. They're learning to use it as a substitute rather than a complement for thinking. We want to teach them, the meta skill we want to teach them is how to use it as a complement for thinking.
Do you think we need for all freshmen a ChatGPT course? How to prompt engineer best across all the fields?
Sorry, I missed what you said.
Do you think we should offer for all freshman students a prompt engineering course, because it's so important across all the classes they will take?
I think an important soft skill is learning how to work well with AI. I think a university that taught their students prompt engineering at a faster rate than they were teaching their faculty is going to end up with a whole lot of problems. But yes, it's an important soft skill. And so as we design tools, we want the key lesson to be economics and the subtext to be teaching you how to work with the tool. So here's like a little bit of structure. This is how an economist might think about this. And once I thought this, it really changed my view about all of this. Knowledge is not scarce. Knowledge is abundant, right? We have libraries full of knowledge. For our students, what's scarce is an understanding of their individual knowledge gaps, knowing what they don't know. And once you understand that, then all of a sudden you understand why one of the things I said is personalization at scale. The personalization is about identifying your knowledge gap. That's where the AI can provide something that is scarce rather than something abundant. So most of our uses of AI so far have been at the abundant end. We've been creating it as a window into knowledge. I think the high value uses are at the scarce end, which is helping people understand their knowledge gaps. So if you want knowledge, all we've got to do is give our students cell phones. They can go to Google. If we want an understanding of knowledge gaps, we've got to go to the student, right? And we have to interact with the student, and we have to get personalization at scale. Okay, so let's think about how we might do that. We're going to try and come up with a useful AI tutor. What are some of the things that we would want? Well, first thing is I asked ChatGPT to show me what the perfect teaching assistant would look like, and this is what it came up with for economics. And then because I was in, I couldn't help but ask, well, if instead you decided that I wanted the perfect teaching assistant as painted by Van Gogh, this is what they would look like. And this is what Dali would come up with. And this is what Klimt would come up with. And I just found the Rembrandt one just striking. This, I think, is an economics tutor. Now, of course, I'm just having fun here, but I do have a vision of what a good teaching assistant looks like. They're smart, and they have pretty close to perfect knowledge of economics. And remember, ChatGPT has that. They're adaptable, and they use the definitions and tools consistent with your course. And that's where that question where I asked, what is the natural rate? And got an answer to a question, but not the question the student was asking. They were asking about the natural rate of interest. That's where it becomes really problematic. And so that's where it becomes important that the AI understands the context in which you are teaching. That's the personalization here, you. And you'll see here, this is actually a question that asks about the natural rate of output. And this is the tutor I'll show you in a little while, and you'll see that, in fact, it understands the context, and so it uses the appropriate sense of the word natural rate.
So do you think tools like Notebook LM would be better because you upload essentially all the background material and it emphasizes primarily this background material?
Absolutely. it's absolutely essential that your assistants echo and reinforce the language, tools, approaches, and framework of your course. You could go the other end. You could say, it's not just language, right? Imagine a University of Chicago student going to UMass Amherst and trying to sit in on macro, or vice versa. Yeah. They would be very quickly confused. So it needs to be adapted to your context. Secondly, you would want it to be empathetic. Now, here's a really interesting study where they had doctors answer medical questions. And they had doctors answer, and then they had ChatGPT answer, and then they sent both answers to a set of medical professionals who graded them. The unsurprising fact is that ChatGPT was actually very good, and in fact better than physicians at answering simple medical questions. You got 79% of the responses were either good or very good. The physicians much, much lower. That's not surprising. What is more interesting is that they also asked the medical professionals to grade the responses for empathy. And remember, we might have a mental model that computers are wooden and not empathetic and incapable of empathy, right? On the flip side, have you ever met a doctor? Certainly mine is not the most empathetic. My brother's a doctor, and he sometimes gets really tired. And when he's tired, he's not very reliable. And in fact, physicians were rated to be empathetic 5% of the time, while ChatGPT was 45% of the time. So if you want to be empathetic, actually, it's not clear you should trust people. And this, I understand, was a study of physicians, but have you met economists? We're not really known for our soft skills. And so I think this right graph might well apply to us pretty well. Here's my favorite example of empathy, by the way. This is actually from a real chat transcript using an AI tutor. The student says it's late, I need to go to sleep, but I should do this now. And the AI tutor says, well, I understand you're feeling tired, but it's important to get a good night's sleep. Why don't we pick this up tomorrow when you're feeling refreshed and you'll be better able to grasp these concepts after a good rest? What do you think? And the student says, okay, this is an actual transcript. 12 hours later, the student comes back and simply types, I'm back. And the tutor says, welcome back. I hope you're feeling refreshed. Are you ready to continue working on the next, this was a chemistry example, reaction? And so this is the type of empathy I wish I had, but the truth is I don't often act like this with my students. You want a tutor that's available when each student needs them. And so this graph actually shows usage of my online tutor. And the gray bars are when you and I are no longer at work. So the white areas are 9 to 5, and the gray bars are after 5 and before 9. And you're not going to be very surprised to hear that students are up working at all hours, very, very late, and at times when it would be inhumane for universities to ask for or insist that we faculty stay awake to answer their questions. So we are now, by using the computers, meeting the students when they need the help. We're also meeting them where they need the help. Many of us run office hours, and office hours are often plagued by undergraduates who feel intimidated by us and don't want to turn up. The thing about an AI tutor is it meets the students where they are, in their dorm room, on their laptop. And more than that, there's some evidence that the students who do turn up to office hours are those from especially privileged backgrounds, who understand the professor is there to work for you rather than that he or she is judging you. And so it may actually be this is a positive for equity, in which underrepresented minorities and low-income students are more likely to use these sorts of computers. And the final thing I want to point out is we can make these tutors multilingual. And you might think, well, that's really important if I teach in California or in Texas, but is it important where I teach? So I downloaded the American Community Survey, which asks people, is there a language other than English spoken at home? And I took just people who are economics majors, which I can do in that survey. And you can see that across the country, there's lots of economics majors who spoke a language other than English at home. In fact, if we want to say, is more than 1 in 10 of your students non-English speaker, the answer is in almost every part of the country, the answer is yes. To which I say, therefore, I think language skills are something that are important for all econ instructors, not just those in Texas or California. And you might say, well, if language skills are an issue, right, hitting 1 in 4 econ majors, and by the way, it's a much higher proportion with younger people and it's a higher proportion, I think, in Econ 101 than for majors. Maybe what we need is Spanish language instruction, but that's not right. It turns out that the languages spoken by non-English speakers are incredibly varied. You may not even have heard of all of these languages. So putting a few Spanish speakers on staff isn't going to solve this problem. The good news, though, is that ChatGPT speaks all of these languages. And so, in fact, if we create an AI tutor, then ChatGPT will be able to create a tutor where people can respond in their native language, 99.2% of economics majors. And I think that's probably an underestimate, by the way. So let me just quickly show you a little bit about this tutor. This is the one I've been working on. So this is just a progress report. I'm working with I'm a textbook author, and so therefore I have an AI team who work with me on these sorts of things. And so I can show you some of what we've been able to create so far. So I'm going to have to, I think, share a different screen.
But in the background, is this OpenAI, or is there some background large language model?
It's OpenAI in the background.
Okay.
So, here's the sort of question you might get in homework. Use the cost and revenue data to answer this question, right? Maybe I don't understand the question, so I just start by saying, could you rephrase it? So now it tells me, well, what's the change? The thing I want you to think about is, if a student came into your office with a question about this, how would your graduate student respond? If they were really well trained and one of your most talented teacher graduate students. And here I think the answer is very similar to this. Well, you'd say, well, I'm not really understanding even the concept. So, okay, what does marginal revenue tell us? All right, I'm starting to get it. So now I'm just going to say, I don't know. Now the bot explains to me what marginal revenue is. Now I'm going to ask it to tell me the answer. It's not going to do that. Right? And so there's required a lot of background work to prevent it from doing that. Okay. How does revenue change when the quantity increases? It rises. Yeah. And so you see that it's slowly guiding me to the set of calculations that I need to make. And it's doing so exactly the way a good Michigan student would do so. So I just want to show you one other fun trick. Now I'm asking it, what does marginal revenue measure? But I'm going to ask it in Spanish. And I don't read Spanish, but I hope that those on this call who do read Spanish can tell you that it's given a very sound economic answer in Spanish. So that's the AI tutor. And now I think I need to share my slides again, which is this one.
So there must be several AI tutors out there. And how is it different from Conmingo? I guess you're familiar with Conmingo as well.
Right. So there's a lot of similarities and some very important differences. So I actually don't know Conmingo well. My kids just signed up for it so I can learn more about it. But there are infinity undirected chatbots out there. And I hope to have given you a sense of why that's a problem. I wouldn't be surprised if the Khan guys got it right because they get lots of stuff right. So really, it's all about what is the work you have to do on the back end to make this work. And it turns out this is less interesting than you might think. Every time they change the algorithm, it changes the behavior of the system. And so it actually requires more maintenance than I want to admit. And it also turns out that when you remember, this is a probabilistic system. We don't ever know how it will work exactly. And then you've got undergraduates trying to game the system. And so that takes a lot. It used to be that if you'd say, I don't know 7 times, it would just give up and give you the answer. And so we've had to train it how not to do that. So I'm not going to say we got anything better or worse. This was just a pretty good effort using very serious AI people and some real engineering effort combined with real economists talking to them at the same time, right? And real pedagogy people talking to them at the same time. Let me show you something you can build at home. So this is more fun. My students had a midterm coming up last week. They actually have now done it. And they did what most students do is they said, well, I'd like some practice questions. So I gave them last year's exam. And they said, I want more practice questions. And anyone who teaches undergraduates will know the thirst for questions from undergraduates is infinite. Now, we could just have them go to Google or ChatGPT and it could say, ask me questions, but it's going to have the problems we described before. So I want someone to help them as they're getting ready for the midterm. Their biggest problem is they've got this guy on screen, and he knows some economics, but he's not that charming. But this guy's really charming. Wouldn't you love Coach Ted Lasso to help you through your next midterm? And so what I did is I combined these two characters, and ChatGPT gave me this. So this is Justin Wolfers meets Ted Lasso. And now again, I want to show you how this works in the real world. I'm going to show you what we ended up calling Coach Lasso. Coach Lasso is Coach Wolfers, sorry, here. One important thing, this is a little bit like your notebook at home. What I've done in the background is I've uploaded my past 5 years of exams. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, once you've written 5 years of exams, you kind of know what the sixth year is going to look like. And in fact, those of us who've been in the profession a few years kind of now understand that when we were writing exams, we were basically little chat GPTs. So I've given it 5 years of exams, and I've given it all of my slides from class. So it knows substantively what I want to ask about. But here I've only trained it on material up to the first midterm. So the first 6 chapters of my textbook. And it knows the type of question. So now I just say to Coach Wolfers, I want to practice some multiple choice questions. And this coach now asks a question that's of a level and a type similar to my past midterms. Often the question will say something about, if you go to the local shop in Ann Arbor, like it really understands. So I'm not even going to read the questions, I'm just going to give answers. And you'll see he kind of responds like Ted Lasso. He's kind of encouraging. And he kind of says, what did you get wrong? What did you get right? How can I help you here? Right? And now the student is in a good place to continue. Now I could say instead, I really struggle with the supply curve. Ask me some And so as a student now, I can find where my weaknesses are, and I can get practice questions the way I want them, when and where I want them, right? So this is the sort of thing you don't need my help of having a whole bunch of back-end engineers. Everyone on this call could implement something like this, and I'm going to implement another one for my students for the next midterm, and the next midterm, and so on. And it means I no longer have to create a whole bunch of practice tests.
Can you put voice on top of it with using your own voice, or?
I could, but that would take more work.
Okay.
And voice now is amazing what you can do. Let me show you one. I'm not sure if we'll get to the text aggregator or not. I'm going to let you decide on timing, Marcus. But I just want to show you.
We can run a little bit longer.
Okay. I want to show you an example of how we should use AI as a teaching collaborator. So one of the things I get asked to do by our Center on Teaching and Learning is let's do more active learning. But that's kind of hard. I got to sit in my office and think about it. Right? And the problem is when the Center on Teaching and Learning comes to my office and they say, can I help you with this? I'm like, yes, I want to teach equilibrium properly. And they're like, what's an equilibrium? And it's a completely pointless discussion because they don't know enough economics and I don't know enough pedagogy. Right. So you might think what you do is you go to ChatGPT and just say, please think up some active learning activities for my class on externalities. But the thing is, I could ask you that, Marcus, and you'd say, hey, man, I need to know more. You couldn't meet my needs just with that question. We economists know there's no such thing as a free lunch because I'm going to have to give you more, Marcus, if you're going to help me. And the same goes for AI. So we need a context. Who are my students? Who's the instructor? What's being taught? We need instructions. How much class time's available? What sort of activities? We need a very precise task, right? And here's the thing that most people don't think about. You need to be able to ask me questions about the task. Well, the same thing goes for ChatGPT. So here's the prompt I recommend using. And I'm leaving that up there so you can take a photo and later on we'll post the slides and you can copy and paste my prompt and so on. But what I want to do is change what I'm sharing. I'm going to go back to my web page. And here I've copy and pasted that prompt. I want to show you something really cool. I'm going to add to it my PowerPoint slides. So tomorrow I'm teaching about externalities and public goods. Here's my slides. Add to my slides. I want to warn you, it's not going to give you a bunch of great ideas. It's like having a doctoral student in your office. I'm going to ask it to give me 5 ideas, and I'm going to throw away 4 of them. But now I'm going to engage in a conversation with it. And often we fail at the conversation point. So it says, let's see if any of these look promising. So here's an example of a tragedy of the commons where each student gets to choose how many fish to take, right? We could imagine making a good simulation out of that. So I'll just say, number 2 looks interesting. Tell me more. And so now it's actually going to give me a full set of instructions. I was about to say my students need detailed instructions, but it's already given them. And so I threw away 4 of them, but I got one that's pretty good. Yes. And then I could go ahead and I could take, take this and make PowerPoint slides, and I'm all set. So that cost me 5 minutes. And this now is using AI as my collaborator, which I think is the form of use that we all want to really be working towards. So let me change what I'm sharing.
How do you interact with the students mostly through iClicker, or do you also interact, more sophisticated when they use their iPhones or smartphones?
Well, so the iClicker now is available on the smartphone. I do a lot of raising hands. And so you can, the point, Marcus, is you can tell ChatGPT what your constraints are. I want to play, sometimes I have them act out a scene on stage. And it's this idea that physically doing something. I had them trading candy the other day as a way of getting a gains from trade. You ask the computer, it's going to come up with some of these ideas. And again, your role then is just to be the editor. So let's finish with a poll. Do we have time to do that?
Yes.
And so Jessica's going to put the poll up in the background, which is to ask, what are 1 or 2 of the most important insights you've learned in this session? And what are some concrete ways in which you might change your teaching? And this is a short answer question, right? So just type. Or separately, Betsy and I have a bunch of resources. Because we're textbook authors, I have a military industrial textbook complex that's willing to make bets on AI tools that I bring them. So if you help me, I help you. I can get the tools developed and get them pushed out to you to use in your econ classes. So I really would appreciate if you could just knock your answers to the short answer question into the poll. While people are typing, Marcus, did you want to come back with any questions while people are answering?
Now you put me on the spot. So the other thing is admission tests like GRE and LSAT and all these things. So it's a little bit outside of this topic we talked about. But do you think this will be a big challenge for them as well, or it's as long as it's held in person, also not online, but it's in person, monitored and all this? Do you think it will be fine, or we have to? The whole admission process for students has to change too, because we don't have.
Right. So there's a short run question and a long run question. In the short run, we cannot have this be online at all. And the fact that you can now just take photos of the screen and that's sufficient, lockdown browsers don't work. The one thing that does work is when you have, that you can make them put the webcam on and keep the webcam on and treat them like criminals. And the student response to that is very, very negative. I find it a little too close to humiliating that I'm not willing to do it. Some of the, they might do it for the GRE and so on. But, you're a student, you're in your seat, you feel like going to the bathroom, but the cops are watching you, and it's too hard. And, you can have you can actually have one keyboard running 2 monitors and 2 computers, and, nothing's going to be bulletproof there. So that's why they are all in person. There's a different question, and it's this deeper question that's going to hit all of us. There's the long run question that I haven't even started to get at. And the long run question is, does this provide new opportunities for assessment? Because if I know, Marcus, you might be old enough that you did the GRE on paper.
Yes.
It then moved to being adaptive, but it was kind of crappy adaptive. But now you can actually have an Oxford tutorial. You can engage in a conversation with the computer about a thing, about an economics topic, and then it can grade you on that. But more broadly, you know, if the skills the workforce demands aren't knowing things when you're in a quiet room with no distractions, then it's not clear we should be using the same ways of admitting students or indeed of teaching. And so that's a much larger conversation that I think takes place over a period of 10 years. I'm trying to get my colleagues comfortable, happy, and productive over the next 5. Jessica, why don't you go ahead and end the poll?
Let me ask one more question. Also in the admission process, do you think the role of admission letters or recommendation letters will also change? Because, you know, it was always a costly signaling. If you write a recommendation letter for a student, it's a lot of work. But now writing a recommendation letter is probably much easier and has not the same meaning as before, and also probably more beefed up and more.
That's right. So when you change costs are an important parameter in signaling games.
Yes.
Signals go away, right? And so it's not just letters of recommendation. It's now very, very easy. Tenure letters are really easy. Yes. If you think about what a research statement is in a tenure case, it's basically a really big prompt for ChatGPT. Yes. And so you might feel bad using that, but it's not clear you should feel bad using that for a first draft, right? Because when I write these letters, what matters is the first paragraph and the last, which is the recommendation, and the rest was constantly signaling to the dean of another school that I actually know the case. Well, there's no way to do that signaling anymore, so why should I do it the expensive way rather than the cheap way? So do it the cheap way. And, you know, more generally, my university makes us write a lot of memos for hiring. I think these make sense only in a signaling world. I don't write memos anymore. I edit first drafts. My dean may not be happy to hear that, but they weren't really taking it seriously at any point anyway.
I mean, I might use ChatGPT to read these letters.
And so very soon we're going to have my AI talking to your AI and so on. So I actually want to tell you, I had hidden, it's not going to work here because we didn't get a lot of responses, but I had hidden here the final application, which is a bunch of people just sent me feedback, but they actually sent it to Princeton rather than to Michigan, so I didn't get all the feedback. But now I have a whole lot of feedback that's unstructured text on what we should do next. Mm-hmm. And you might think that's going to take me a lot of time to deal with, but actually that's what a large language model is for. And so what I would normally do in real time is I would take those, if I were in Princeton, I could copy all of the responses I just got, put them in the large language model, and tell you back what the 3 or 4 biggest points were. This now is my 4th application of AI, which is we can use it to summarize unstructured text. And that's the new application, it's unstructured text, right? We always knew how to use iClickers. So now what we can do is we could say to students at the end of class, what did we learn today? And then have the AI tell us what the 3 most common points were. Or we could say, what did you find hard? And not force them to answer A, B, C, or D, just let them tell us. And then it would tell us what the 3 biggest teaching points were that we needed to repeat. Or I could say, how's class going so far? And instead of having to read 500 responses, I could ask the AI to quickly summarize the 3 most important themes that it saw. Or I'm going to do a class for my Econ 101 class the day before the election, where I'm going to talk about the big economic issues that have come up during the election campaign. But I don't know what they want to talk about. So I'm just going to ask them. And I'm going to ask but rather than read 500 responses, I can come through and try and figure out what the key themes are and make sure I can deliver for my students the class they wanted. So that's all of that. What have we got here? The new teaching opportunity is personalization at scale. The 4 tools that I've shown you are just the 4 that I've thought of. I have a lot of engineering talent that can help me, and I can create these tools for the economics community, and I'm excited to do that. AI is amazing. Even if you don't believe that in most of your work, it can revolutionize what you're doing on the teaching side. And so I'm not sure how seriously I want to take these 4 applications, but this broader idea that there should be a conversation within the profession and we should be building these tools, I take absolutely seriously.
So do you think teaching will be less work for us in the long run or more work? Or in the transition phase, it might be more work, especially for people like you who drive the change?
So I'm sure many people on this call will remember Keynes's Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren,
Yes.
where Keynes looked at the world around us, which has so much automation going on and such enormous rises in productivity that we wondered what we'd do with our time. And it turns out there's both income and substitution effects. And it turns out they're almost exactly offsetting. And it turns out that what we should do with our time wasn't a problem. Now, maybe Keynes needs to rewrite that paper in 2024, or maybe this allows us to push back the frontier. Now, I think there's two things I want to say in terms of the future. One is some of this is just skills you and I should learn. The same way we had to learn what a spreadsheet was and how to use a spreadsheet. Learning to use AI as part of your usual workday flow, I think, is really, really important. There's a separate thing, which is developing tools. And I've learned you can develop bad versions of tools very easily, but good versions of tools have have a public goods feature to them. Well, not public goods, but there's increasing returns and so on. So that's where folks like me are going to be important, which is I'm going to take ideas from the econ community and hammer my textbook publisher. They're going to end up subsidizing this whether they want to or not, and hopefully our teaching is better as a result. But there's this broader question, what should we be doing next? And so I just want to give people for how we should use this in our lives, the first of those questions. The advice I give my friends is every day when you go to work, open ChatGPT in a separate window. And your goal before you leave work is to use it in a way you've never used it before. So it's easy to see you could write a tenure letter. And now I've shown you that you can ask for active learning activities. I was talking to a friend the other day and he planned a family vacation. Because a family vacation is exactly the sort of combinatorics that computers are really good at. Like if I go to this city first, which city do I go to next, and so on like that. You can use it to learn a new language, brainstorm new product ideas, all sorts of things. But that should be the challenge. What can I do? And what you'll hopefully discover is you'll succeed 2/3 of the time and fail 1/3 of the time. And if you're not failing 1/3 of the time, you're not pushing it hard enough. So that's my advice. And then, the goal here, actually, let me just tell my joke. Lots of people's first reaction is, oh my God, this can do my job. And then like, oh shit, this can do my job. The goal is to end up like this. This can help me do my job. And then in terms of useful references, I just finished reading Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick, and I think it's marvelous. And I recommend it to anyone. And Dan Levy also has a wonderful book, particularly applied to teaching, that I would also recommend.
If you put yourself in the shoes of a president of a university or some dean, and you think about, do I need more faculty members down the road? Do I need more TAs? Or do I need, more technicians or Center for Learning, digital learning? Where should I put my resources in?
Such a good question. So I would refuse to hire technophobes in any field. So if you want to be a Shakespeare scholar, that's fine, but don't tell me you just use pencil and paper, because that still might be enough for the research side of your job. Not really, but definitely is not going to be enough for the teaching side. The Center for Teaching and Learning, I would either fire them or hire more of them. But they need to understand their job is they're facing the biggest technological revolution, I genuinely believe, in their lifetimes and possibly in the history of higher education. And they have to lead or get out of the way. And at the moment, too many are not leading. So I'd open up a whole bunch of lines for hiring folks coming out of information degrees and not hiring, a lot of these places are full of failed humanities scholars. That's the wrong skill set for the future. And as for faculty, teaching assistants, lecturers, for schools like Princeton, if you've got the very top talent in the world, this is a way to leverage it. So go to the donors and say, we can teach the world if you give my folks the resources to do it. You have to accept the new mission. The mission is not to be an exclusive enclave of the next generation of the ruling class, which many of our private universities have been and are to an extraordinary degree. And so, the pressure, should Harvard double its class size? No. Harvard should be 10,000 times larger. That's the minimum scale it should be. An awkward point is I was working on this AI tutor while the Michigan graduate students were on strike last year. And if you can't see the substitutability here, you're not looking. But again, it's just like past revolutions, which is some tasks go away, some new tasks come on. And so I think the big answer is you want people and skills that are complementary to the new skills that are created, and not at all the sets of skills that are going away. For instance, we've hired our last translator. Translators are gone, right? But critical thinking still remains important. And there's this much deeper question, which is, what are the skills of the future? And so we have a bunch of studies where they've taken every occupation and looked at how many could be outsourced. If you want to do physical labor, you want to be a gardener, a short order cook, a window repair guy, those jobs still exist. Then there's, what's new about this revolution is it's cognitive. It's the first truly cognitive revolution. You can line up the jobs from those least likely to go away to those most likely to go away. Coding and writing are the ones that are going to go away. So paralegals, translators, copy editors, they're all gone. Coding the old way, gone. But what's down this end is actually science and critical thinking. And so that sort of long-term question, how should we change what we teach? I think we want to go long science and critical thinking, short writing and coding. Some people say we should load up on empathy because computers can't do empathy, but I think I've got pretty good evidence they can. And some people say we should load up on creativity. But actually, the tests so far show that ChatGPT is more creative at coming up with things like new product ideas than Wharton MBA students. There's actually a paper showing that. So it's not obvious that creativity is the answer, because what we really want is new combinations of ideas. Well, ChatGPT has read everything in Arabic and everything in English. And so the new combinations of ideas, it may be uniquely well suited at. It's also read all of economics as well as all of sociology. So I'm actually quite excited about those possibilities, but that's where it has a comparative advantage.
Let me throw another one or two questions at you. Where do you see the big innovators in that space? Do you think they are coming more from universities? They will fund some centers and drive this innovation forward? Or do you think it will be more the textbook publishers? They are switching now to these online AIs? Or do you think it's coming more out of Silicon Valley? Or where do you see the big innovators coming from? Or is all these guys moving that direction? Or...
That's a great question. So actually, I think the economics of AI are absolutely fascinating. The fundamental idea that gave rise to all of this was the transformer model, which was written by half a dozen guys at Google. Yes. And it will transform our economy in our lifetimes. And I already showed you it can do all the work that all of the Michigan teaching assistants do, for instance, right? Google let those guys leave the company and monetized $0 of the innovation.
Probably good.
These folks went to OpenAI and they've created ChatGPT, which is this wonderful and amazing technology, but actually the applications all need to be developed by someone who can just pick up their work and take it one step closer. Here's how to create an economics tutor, here's how to create a something tutor, and so on. So OpenAI has monetized remarkably little of the value that it's created. And if you look at sort of GDP, forecasts and so on, claims that the standard forecast is GDP will be 10 points higher in a decade. So this is trillions of dollars, which are not being monetized by the actual inventors. I don't think universities have done a good job. What I have met is very small niche pockets of people who just are nerdy and got in at the ground floor. There's a wonderful group at the University of Toronto. You had Kevin Bryan here. They've been talking to OpenAI for over a decade. Betsy goes to their conferences. Nothing there was a surprise, and they've released things. I think textbook publishers will actually turn out to be an important innovator for one very strange reason, which is if you believe it's really important that the robot be trained on your materials, they own the materials. And so therefore they're the only ones who actually have the ability to create the highly personalized bots given current intellectual property ownership. I keep trying to explain this to my publisher as I keep asking them for more money, and they're kind of, sort of, kind of getting it. But if you look at, any small, there's a wonderful, you might be using one, Marcus, app that will record every Zoom call and then send you a one-page readout of what was said, by who, and what the action items are. Such an incredible time saver. It turns out it's not run by OpenAI. It's run by another company. The one I use is called Fathom. So OpenAI is not getting the money. OpenAI is charging them a little bit, but not much. It's going to save me hours a year. They're barely charging a penny for it. And there are so many of these applications out there. Like I think we have, what we were in the middle of is this sort of confusing thing, which is we have 1 million entrepreneurs who are basically plugging into the OpenAI API and their colleagues. And at some point, something's going to happen. I don't know what, but at the moment, it really is 1,000 flowers bloom.
2 more questions. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you see ourselves going to a superstar phenomenon? There will be a few superstars taking over, and they're surrounded by some AI developers rather than teachers widely spread across thousands of colleges.
Yeah. So I've bet some amount of my career on this occurring. Because if there's going to be an Econ 101, if there's going to be one Econ 101 instructor for the world, I'd really like it to be me. Now, we've had 800 years of this not happening, right? Now, on the flip side, I think it's very different at different colleges, right? So it would be strange for you to take a lot of direction on how you teach from me. But if you were teaching up the road here at Washington Community College and you had a day job, the idea that you should outsource what's on your syllabus and how it's taught and so on is actually a very sound idea. And in fact, that's how the market works. That already exists. It's called a textbook. Yes. And so then the question is, can I supplement that textbook with tools that make you even more powerful? So no, the world's not going to end up with just one economics instructor called Greg Mankiw. But we have moved from a world in which we each used to individually write each of our lectures to many of us being willing to take more and more direction. And our job as those of us who want to be on the production side of that is understanding your needs and then producing the material for you. It's incredibly wasteful to have hundreds of economics PhDs around the country producing slides on how to teach demand and supply. So what I do is I have a team and we produce beautiful slides, right? And it doesn't cost me much time because I got a team, but beautiful slides. And we use data viz people and all this stuff. I'm unapologetic in thinking that's good. That's threatening to some people, but I want to point out, you're still in the spotlight. My job is just to make sure you shine while you're in the spotlight. And so there seems to be something really fundamental about human connection that we still haven't gotten past. Marcus, there's a reason that many people are watching this webinar live rather than on YouTube. And there's a reason that you're talking to me rather than my chatbot that I showed you earlier. And so I think that human connection is really important. And so maybe that stays disaggregated, but on the back end, my job is to help you do a better job.
You know, what happened with online learning, there was a huge hype too, and everybody thought, oh, wow, this will change everything within 5 years, especially after COVID. But it didn't happen. People were so happy to come back to physical interactions. Do you think there could be a similar opportunity, or that it might happen the same way, that AI will go away again, or that it's fundamentally different? This will really change fundamentally our teaching.
So could we be in the middle of a hype cycle? We've seen this movie before, that was MOOCs. Yeah. Sure, we could. A few things aren't going to change though. You are never going to be able to do high stakes at home homework ever again. That's gone. So we are going to have to change that. AI is going to change some of the work that many of our students do. It could be hype as in it's not going to change the world for most workers, but you and I are mostly teaching white collar workers. And so I don't know about you, but I feel like, I now know what Detroit auto workers felt like in the 70s when you could see robots that could kind of do what they did. And if you think what ChatGPT does, it can read a lot of economics and then summarize it in elegant prose. That's actually most of what I do for a living. So I feel a lot like a Detroit auto worker right now. Now, it turns out there's new jobs. There's the guy who repairs the robot that makes the car, And that's, I think, who we want to be. So could it be overhyped? Absolutely. For 800 years, higher education has looked almost identical, which is, someone stands at the front of the room and talks and someone sits at the back and writes stuff down. And there's a newspaper called the Chronicle of Higher Education that predicts there'll be enormous change next week, and it's done that every week since it was founded, so you don't want to bet against it. But Marcus, I do want to point something out. You just gave a very American private school answer. I can tell you the state of Australia's public schools. We went to COVID. COVID changed the rules where now it's expected that you record your lecture. The university now requires it, and the students are not back on campus. So Australian higher education still looks like the middle of COVID, and there have been permanent changes. In fact, this seminar is an example of a permanent change. Now, is there a hype cycle? Yes, because I hoped during COVID that it meant that all economics discourse was democratized. It wouldn't all occur on the campus of Princeton University.
Yes.
But it turns out you're the exception, and we've all gone back to our little cloisters where we can be part of our exclusive clubs and therefore keep non-Ivy League people out of our discussions. And so, yes, that was another hype cycle. But, some things are definitely going to stay changed.
Final question. Sorry for running so long.
I love it.
Gamification. If you think about problems was that to keep people online, it was essentially the commitment to be online. So being together in a room was much easier because the other students are around, you can't run away. And one solution essentially was to gamify things, to gamify teaching. And Duolingo tried a lot in that space. Do you think in that, when you think about AI tutors, the gamification element will be an important element as well?
Sort of. I'm a mild optimist. So one thing I know is the chat logs from when students are talking to the tutors. They really think they're people. Like, not that they think they're people, but young folks are much more relaxed about having a conversation with an AI. I think one of the important lessons we learned, by the way, is we want to de-emphasize the fact that it's an AI on the other end, right? There's a reason the one I showed you was called Coach Wolfers. I want you to think about a person who knows what I do, a person who speaks how I do, and so on. I think gamification can be amazing, as in TikTok is incredible. My daughter can't stop using it. I sometimes open it and I can't. Now, TikTok's a multi-billion-dollar company. Now, so some people then move from being a genuine business model, TikTok, and actually Snapchat's even worse. They find all these ways to make you keep coming back. It's not just about talking to people. There's streaks and so on, and they work. And now, so then people took this idea of gamification, and then it became a business buzzword. And 2 years after it's a business buzzword, the McKinsey consultants walk onto campus, and the Center for Teaching and Learning, or the Vice Provost for Teaching, says, well, we've got to use the word gamification. And then they put millions instead of billions into it, and they discover that academics who are poorly resourced do a shitty job. So I think one answer is we actually haven't tried. I think that's also true of MOOCs, by the way. I think most of them are very low quality. I'm in the middle actually of a MOOC project where I've asked for an extra zero in production funding. And it might be I fail, but we do know people turn on TV and they watch nerdy stuff. And actually, if you look at the stuff people watch on TikTok, it's not just people dancing. They're really, really into nerdy stuff, but presented in a way that's engaging. And it might be that the last folks you want to ask for engaging content, you would say the single one qualification you wouldn't want is an ability to pass the microeconomics quals. Because anyone who can pass that probably isn't going to be a TikTok star and probably isn't the right person to gamify. So with the right amount of money and talent, I think there's more that can be done. I don't think universities are well set up to do it. I don't see anyone who's well set up to do it, but I think it's possible.
Let me stop with a final question. So far for hundreds of years in universities researchers were also teachers and vice versa. Going forward, you see a further split that some people will just purely become researchers and others will purely become lecturers and teaching the next generation? Or do you think it will stay together? Given the new tools?
So when I teach Economics 101, I teach my students this idea of complements in production versus substitutes in production. And it all feels very esoteric until I explain there's teaching and research. Okay. And do you think these are complements in production? The fact that I spent all my morning running regressions, do you think that makes me better talking to you about Econ 101 now? or do you think it makes me worse? And we are at a point where there are colleges like Wellesley College or Williams College or any of the great teaching colleges that basically are set up on the assumption that these are basically substitutes in production. Mm-hmm. And we have the University of Michigan and Princeton that has bet that they're complements in production. And I don't quite know the truth. I don't think that AI necessarily changes that balance in an important way. I do think that whether you're a teacher or a researcher, you will need skills that are complementary with AI. So both of those have to be complementary. Whether developing research-specific AI skills will be complementary to teaching, at this early point it will be, because we're basically moving people from you either know nothing or you're willing to experiment. And when you experiment, it does have payoffs. Let me emphasize this to anyone who's still with us. Yes, this is a talk about teaching, but if you start to use this in your teaching, I promise you payoffs in your research career.
I promised you a last question. Let me throw in another one. How long do you think this transition phase will last? Is it will happen next 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years?
So the Industrial Revolution led to 80 years of misery and stagnating wages while they figured out how to use this new tool. Mm-hmm. Electricity, it took 30 years to see it in the productivity data as we had to reorganize the factory floor in ways that used electricity. Bob Solow famously said he could see in the 1990s, you could see computers everywhere except in the productivity statistics. And we think probably it showed up during the Clinton era. So that's 10, 15, 20 years. So if history is any guide, it's going to take a long time. I showed you statistics at the front suggesting our students are rushing there and they're all using it. Mm-hmm. But there's good census data that asks American companies whether they have implemented AI, and about 3% have, maybe 6%, and another 3% plan to do so in the next 6 months, suggesting the pace of adoption is very slow. And then if you think about the equivalent of reorganizing the factory floor, a lot of that is us teaching stuff differently, right? So the way we currently teach and examine our students, it's doubly true in law school, by the way, is we lock them up in a room with no materials and ask them their opinions on stuff, which for a lawyer would actually be cause for malpractice and a lawsuit for incompetent counsel. And for an economist, there's no such way of suing them, but there really should be. And if someone made policy for this country in a locked room with no resources and no friends, I would say they'd be the worst policymaker we've ever had. And so that reinvention of what we've got to learn and how, I'm certain will take a very, very long time. And so if you want to be a productivity pessimist, it's that it's going to be like computers. It's going to be slow. That's the stronger argument, I think, rather than it's not going to happen. The productivity gains here are just so enormous.
Okay, thanks a lot, Justin. We will talk again to see, how things have changed, and we stay in touch. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate for all your listeners, and hope that you will change the world and you make the first steps. Every journey starts with one step at a time. Thanks for everybody, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.